House is now in Standing Finance Committee. Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Mr. Chair, thank you for recognizing me. In using my 3 minutes, sir, before I get into my actual questions, I just want to commend the minister and his team for the shepherding and the strides that have been made over the last couple of years with respect to labor. I think since the initial labor push decades ago, this is perhaps the most comprehensive review and advancement of the cause of labor that Barbados has seen for an exceedingly long time. I sometimes sort of get a little bit dizzy at the pace with which this particular Minister of Labor has moved and his advocacy for and on behalf of labor in all its forms in Barbados. So I know he doesn't get there by himself. So I wish to commend him and his hard-working team for the strides that they've made and for all of the initiatives that have informed their estimates for the coming years. I just want to start by saying that. Sir, I also wish to touch on some statements that were made by the Honourable Member for Christchurch South. Sir, in particular, his suggestions that the minister did not benefit from the best legal advice possible. And he centered those, sir, around the rather pedestrian argument as to exactly where the appeals should be and whether or not the labor or the employee was at the focus or at the center of the proceedings, especially when it relates to the revoking of concessions. Now, sir, the minister took great pains to point out, and I wish to once again, in my capacity, sir, as acting Attorney General, in defense of the substantive Attorney General, point out to my good friend that the matters concerning appeals in relation to the labor aspect, the rates and the terms of work, and those conditions, sir, fundamental to the operation of labor in Barbados, those, sir, are handled by the Employment Rights Tribunal. And as they properly should, it concerns the rights of the employer and the employee and their relationship vis-a-vis each other. Those are properly handled, articulated, ventilated, adjudicated on by the Employment Rights Tribunal, which is set up for that purpose. When we were contemplating, sir, the Labour Clauses Amendment that we recently debated in Parliament in both houses, the thought process was there must be, once you're revoking a concession or taking away something that somebody had, whether or not it was a discretionary entitlement, well, I don't want to use entitlement, whether or not it was something that was discretionarily given or as of right, there must be some leeway for the person to make representation. And we thought, how could we properly center that? Do we center that back within the same Employment Rights Tribunal? It was decided it would not be properly placed there because the Employment Rights Tribunal would have heard the situation and the issues between the employee and the employer already. The minister, in making a decision whether or not to revoke concessions, has to be informed by something, and generally that would be a finding as to whether the terms of the employment were breached or whether the basic terms were actually breached. So he's starting by operating from a finding of some sort. So we looked at all the tribunals that we had, and the decision was made, rather than creating another tribunal just to hear this one part, that quite frankly, sir, if the employers and the owners of businesses actually did what was right, did what was simply right, we would probably never have to use it or to employ it. So let us cite this responsibility now within an existing tribunal. Because, sir, it concerns revenue, because it concerns a discretionary grant on the part of the Minister of Finance to grant the concessions in the first place. And I must make the point, concessions are not anything as of right. The decision to grant concessions or not grant concessions is a discretionary one that resides within the bosom of the Minister of Finance. So it was properly thought that let us center this appeal process, sir, with the Barbados Revenue Appeals Tribunal. And that's why it was done. So it was not a willy-nilly thought process. It was not an ad hoc decision. This was a sound decision based on the need to not create yet another tribunal to perform what would in effect be an exceedingly limited function. Sir, I would be very surprised if after we've passed 2 years of this legislation being enforced, that discretion has to be exercised more than twice or 3 times. I'd be very, very, very surprised. Because we're not asking for persons to step outside of the box. We're not asking for employers to be exemplary employers. We are saying toe a basic minimal line that everybody accepts is in accordance with basic human dignity and the rights of the employee. So I just wish to assure the Honourable Minister of Labour, sir, through you, I don't think he's in any doubt that he did receive the best advice and that this is the best structure in which to center any appeals coming from a decision to withdraw concession, sir. So I think the comments of the Honourable Member for Christchurch South were a bit of grandstanding, and it is unfortunate he made those comments, sir, in the absence of the substantive Attorney General, who he was effectively pointing the finger at. But you know what, sir? We all represent each other, and we represent good governance. And I think that is my firm belief that the best advice was given, the best advice was followed, and this is the best structure. And if my friend has any cause to grind, he knows exactly what process he should go through to enforce the rights of his interests, which appears, sir, to not be labor. Sir, back now to the substantive estimates. I'm concerned, sir. I'm concerned because we have this discussion about labor all the time. This has occupied us a lot for the last few weeks with what was, by all accounts, supposed to be a very, very non-contentious piece of legislation. And you keep hearing labor and representatives. And I do note, sir, that there is a subvention. I think it's page 259 of the estimates, that I was trying to determine, sir, what exactly constitutes a trade union? What exactly legitimizes a trade union? What do you have to do to establish a trade union? Because I noticed there's a subvention, and the Honourable Member for Christchurch South was focusing on subventions recently as well. There seems to be a big bee in his bonnet. But I would like, sir, to be advised as to what does a trade union have to do to establish itself, keep itself in good standing, and to be able to actively represent people. And then equally, this is question number 2, equally, what qualifies a trade union to be recognized as a bargaining agent in a particular department or sphere?
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'll ask the Chief Labour Officer to respond to your questions.
Thank you, Minister. Under the Trade Union Act, there are a number of things that an entity, a body has to do to go through the process of becoming or being labeled as a trade union. Now, among those things would be submitting to the Registrar of Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property certain things, including copies of your rules. You also need to give an indication of your address, the address, what then becomes your registered address. You also need to be able to indicate where there is a change in your address. You also need to notify about that. There's also the requirement to submit certain things concerning your financials. So there is something called submission of your annual returns, which would be giving, from our layman's perspective, giving an overview of your basic expenditure incomes, There are also things that if you have vested interests in things like land and other types of property, you also need to give an indication to the registrar of who those trustees are. And those are among some of the things that piece of legislation would require a trade union to, or a body seeking to become a trade union to have in place.
I thank you for that. But I noticed that the subventions are provided for, I think, I see listed here, sir, BIMA, BC, BWU, NUPW, C2SAB, is Foundation of Barbados, Human Resource Management Association of Barbados, right? That's in the same, on the same page 259. Are those the entities recognized as trade unions within Barbados?
Not the entirety of the list that you mentioned. Say, for example, HERMAB. I would say that HERMAB would not be listed as a...
You're dropping out.
Right, I said of the list that you gave, for example, HERMAB would not be considered a trade union.
Okay, but the major trade, I'm seeing here some recognized names. I'm seeing one noticeable absence, quite frankly. Generally in Barbados, when people think of trade unions, they think of BW, NUPW, I think C2SAB to some extent. And I guess there are others that are cropping up there. I just want to know from the position of somebody who, I've never been a member of a trade union, right? So this is not a facetious question. It is, how do I know whether someone seeking to represent me, how would I be able to find out whether somebody seeking to represent me actually is registered so to do and in good standing within the rules that govern trade unions or labor associations in Barbados?
That person will be best advised to seek the services of the Office of Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property. And that office, which is the office through the registrar there, is charged with administering the Trade Union Act. They would be able to give the person that information, be able to share with them their list of registered entities.
So do you have like, to hand a list of persons, of entities that are so qualified as of now?
I don't have it to hand. I don't have that to hand.
Honourable Member, I have the list of those entities that we hear about from time to time as trade unions and that are registered with CAIPO. They include the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, Barbados Union of Teachers, Barbados Registered Nurses Association, which has changed to Barbados Nurses Association, Barbados Secondary Teachers Union, Barbados Workers Union, National Union of Public Workers, Unity Workers Union. These are registered with CAIPO, Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office. In terms of if you would ask a question before about the things that are required of a trade union, a registered trade union, that are in place, I would say that based on the information I have as at around the end of January, almost all of the organizations have most things in place. There is one organization that doesn't have, there's no record of any financials, any annual returns, anything like that. But the others have their filings and their notice of address in place.
I don't like to single out people, right? Because, you know, I don't like to single out people. So for those persons who want to know if they're in a position to be represented, properly represented by an organization in good standing, can you please list the ones that, according to your records, have actually done? I seem to be putting you on a spot because you seem to not want to directly answer this question. But I do, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch South keeps insisting, the people need to know. Can you just advise me, don't advise me who is not in good standing. Can you advise me the ones that are compliant with all the regulations and thus in good standing as of now? Do you have that?
Yes, the ones that are in good standing. The Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, Barbados Union of Teachers, Barbados Nurses Association, Barbados Secondary Teachers Union, Barbados Workers Union, and the National Union of Public Workers.
That's it?
Yes, those that are in good standing have submitted, where we have the address, where we have the rules, where we have financials. So where there are all the boxes ticked, to put it that way.
So what are actually the consequences to somebody, if you're talking about enforcing the law and making sure that persons are getting what they expect? Are there any consequences for non-compliance?
There is in that Trade Union Act a fine, a penalty of $25 per day when there is a certain aspect of your registration that is not up to date.
And do you all enforce that?
Anything under the Trade Union Act is enforced by the office, by the Registrar, Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property.
All right, fair enough. So just I had asked another part to that question that hasn't been addressed. What qualifies a trade union to be the representative union for a sector or for an organization? What do they need to have? How many can you have represent? When the employer, sit down to talk to somebody saying, I am the union representing your employees, what does that person have to prove to me? Or what line do they have to get across that I know whether I'm dealing with them or with somebody else or with nobody at all?
Usually the officer will respond to you.
Right. Now, as far as looking at that line that you have to get across, the customer practice, the entrenched customer practice, would say that the person or the entity seeking recognition, as we would call it, with a particular employer needs to be able to demonstrate that that entity meaning the union seeking the recognition, needs to have a membership of 50% plus one of the organization if they're seeking, to represent the organization or a particular bargaining unit or subset within the organization. And that, as I said, is something established through customer practice. It is not managed through, or there's no legal provision, no act, for example, that would say that, but it is a respected and entrenched customer practice.
So while I accept that there's no act saying that and is accepted customer practice, if that is what I need to know from the position of an employer, right? Who am I obliged to be talking with? I also need to know from the position of an employee. Is this the person qualified to speak on my behalf? And should I be paying them dues? So as an employer, if somebody comes and says, I represent this set of people here, your employees, if that person does not meet the threshold of 50% plus one, then as the employer, am I obliged to recognize them as bargaining on behalf of my employees?
If the employer is looking at applying the customer practice strictly, then...
But labor is all about customer practice. The one thing they keep saying is customer practice. Not law, not legality, customer practice.
Then the employer may not then recognize that particular entity or body. On the other hand, the employer, in the whole thrust of good industrial relations and harmony, industrial peace, may choose to treat with the particular individual Now, should there be the case where the employer then wants to have some verification of what he should be doing, if he should be treating or, engaging with a particular entity, then the employer can request the services of the Labor Department, Ministry of Labor, to have what we call a poll or survey done of the particular unit or the organization, depending on what the union, the trade union is seeking, to have a count done to establish the membership.
But, okay, as an employer, am I obliged to deal with more than one representative organization if more than one says it's there? If I can clearly establish who, I guess, has the majority support within my organization, am I obliged to deal with more than one once the majority support can be clearly established?
Again, that is within the purview of the employer. The employer may choose to do so.
But is not obliged to?
He's not obliged to, but he may choose to do so.
Nope.
And recognizing that that is the case, and the nature of industrial relations is changing, ever evolving, the proposed Trade Union Act, there is a provision in there that would help in such situations.
No, fine, no problem. Thank you very much. The reason I asked, let me explain the reason I asked. These questions keep coming up. And as I said yesterday to my friend, the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South, that sometimes it's necessary for us to publicize certain things so people understand the process a little bit more clearly. That we sometimes take things for granted and assume that people know. But even with government policies or social programming or benefits that are there, sometimes it's necessary to put them out there to clear up the frequently asked questions. So there were some questions that I received in the same way that the Honourable Member for Christchurch South receives questions and asks them. I thought it was best to just seek your clarification. And perhaps I might encourage you that going forward, if you can put out something that lets the public of Barbados know, especially with those areas, those gray areas, you may know and appreciate it because you're in this area all the time, right? Some employers may, but for others, then there are those questions that people just sometimes need the answers to, so they know which way to go, so they can obey the spirit of the legislations or the bargaining arrangements and just do the right thing. So, thank you.
Yeah, and Honourable Member, I would add that the ministry, including the Labour Department, is actively working out. As a matter of fact, as recently as a few days ago, we've been working through a schedule, starting the process of preparing a schedule for sharing information with the general public. Because we do realize that there are persons who just don't know and who are confused, and in this era in which we live, they're hearing noises and voices from all kinds of places and are not aware of all the information. So some people are not aware of the 50% plus one, and that is something, like the Chief Labour Officer indicated, is entrenched in our culture and practice. So that is something that we live by and live with. We have done probably 2 or 3 of those surveys in recent times, not just related to representation in the private sector, but also in the public sector. We've done those surveys, and it is our intention as we move forward to do more of that publicizing of the kinds of information that the public needs in order to make its decisions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member for Christchurch East. Honourable Member for St. John.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Minister, I don't have a lot of questions, just one in particular. We would have had some discussions in relation to work in the U.S. Now, I would have mentioned before that I would have seen some ads for hundreds of persons to be heavy-duty truck drivers, bus drivers. I know we have a similar situation in Canada with the farm labor program. At my ministry, there's a Drive to Work program where we're assisting youngsters to gain heavy-duty license. My question is, what is the possibility of your ministry exploring opportunities in the US for these youngsters who we are looking to find employment for? The second question I'll ask one time. In terms of the farm labor program, what is the process of persons being engaged in that particular project under you?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I'll ask the Director of the Barbados Employment and Career Counseling Service, to respond, but to begin by saying what we used to call the farm labor program, we no longer refer to it as that. We've been modernizing our language in order to attract young people to some of these areas of occupation. We correctly call it either a migrant worker program or, in this particular case, the seasonal agricultural worker program. So that there is, I think we understand, I was going to say there is a dignity to the work, but I think we understand that words mean something. And when people hear certain words or a certain construction put to a concept, the response may be to the words and not to the substance. So it is the seasonal agricultural worker program when it relates to Canada, and I'll ask the director to speak to the truckers as well as to that seasonal agricultural worker program.
In relation to the truckers and transportation in the USA, the liaison officer, recall I said earlier about the challenge that we have with that office being very small, and it right now constitutes one liaison officer, but that officer is actively engaged in building connections with recruiters and employers. There are some regulatory things that need to be done. So those, we're exploring those to make that a reality. And we have a similar thing going on in Canada as well. So at this point, we don't have the vacancies or the placements available, but we are working towards having that during the course of this financial year. In relation to the question of the process for recruitment to the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program, the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program, as well as the Temporary Farm Workers Program, which would be all of the jobs in Canada outside of agriculture. The process starts with the submission of the interested person's curriculum vitae or resume to the BECS. We have a dedicated email address. The CV is received, it is reviewed by our staff. The person is invited for a pre-screening interview, and then when vacancies become available, if they are for unnamed workers. So what happens in the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program is that some employers request the same workers year after year. So it's where there is an unnamed worker on a document called the LMIA, then those vacancies are then offered to persons who are found to be suitable based on the pre-screening. That is the process.
If I may add to what the director has indicated, with respect to trucking or truck drivers, as an example, we were pursuing a possibility of having truck drivers in the UK. The barrier that presented itself, or the barrier that prevented us to take advantage of the opportunity, is that up until this point, our understanding is that in order to get the license, you have to go to the UK. We're talking about people, young maybe and not so young, who are looking for a job, who do not have the $2,000, $1,800 to go to take the test without knowing that there's going to be a job at the end of the test, even though there are vacancies. So that has proven to be a bit of a challenge, but we have decided to have a discussion with our High Commission in the UK to find out if maybe on the diplomatic side, there can be some accommodation for us, especially as a former colony, and as a former colony that is speaking to the matter of reparations, it may be able to, to be accommodated in that space. But that is one of the challenges that we have found with respect to truckers. I'd also want to say to the honourable member, if you have information relating to these kinds of opportunities, our ministry is very happy to share the information, share your information, to have discussions with you, and to use our resources and facilities to accommodate. To maybe illustrate what I'm saying, the Ministry of Tourism and National Transport was approached on the matter of opportunities in the cruise sector. And that ministry pursued those opportunities, and at a point in the process, engaged our ministry, because our ministry has the expertise in the area. And we were able then to work collaboratively with the Ministry of the Ministry of Tourism and National Transport to allow and to open up and to allow for Barbadians to have opportunities in the cruise sector. So if the ministry responsible for youth has similar information, we can work collaboratively. We have determined that we will not perpetuate a siloed approach to governance.
Thank you, Minister. Definitely we'll be in contact with you to forge that partnership. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for Christ Church, West Central.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I want to thank you for your work thus far. I mean, I say so in a selfless way, you are already the unsung hero in this government. And I want to reflect on what I call a noble piece of legislation you brought here, if my memory serves me correct, on the 5th of February, entitled the Labor Clauses Concessionary Act 2024, which will make provisions for people in my constituency, the constituency that I often refer to as the epicenter of Christ Church. Those persons who work in the various industries, in the restaurants, you name it, who are asking me as their voice in Parliament to say to you and all your staff a heartfelt thanks. A heartfelt thanks for taking this noble approach to recognize their efforts and to say to them that they must be treated with a measure of respect and justice in this country as it relates to the way how we treat the employees in Barbados. They want to say thanks from the bottom of their heart to you for bringing that legislation. I want you, for the listening public, to be able to expound on the benefits that this type of legislation would bring to the average working class person, those not only in Christchurch West Central, but all across Barbados. I just want to give the opportunity to able to tell Barbadians what this new deal, because it's a new deal for them, what it really means in terms of helping improve their livelihood. That's why my first, and then I'll go on to my second question. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The essence of the legislation is the protection of basic rights for workers. The Public Concessions, the Labour Clauses Concessions Act 2024 does not replace any existing piece of labour legislation. And I think that needs to be made clear. There are a number of pieces of legislation that are mentioned in the third schedule to the Act. Those pieces of legislation are listed there, one, because in our consultations with worker representatives and employer representatives, there was the view posited that we should list these pieces of, well, these enactments, pieces of legislation, both from the concession granting perspective as well as the worker protection perspective. Those pieces of legislation are listed because they're already law, so that any rates of pay and conditions of work that are to be established for any sector will assume those to be part of the conditions because they must be. They are the law of the land, as we will say. And the Act is constructed in such a way as to allow the minister by order to add if there is a new piece of labor legislation that requires adherence by all employers. What the Labor Clauses Concessions Act does reflects what the Labor Clauses Public Contract Act did and still does, which is to provide what I will now refer to as an incentive for employers to be good employers. Each of the pieces of legislation mentioned in the third schedule have their own ways of adjudication, have their own penalties, and those are good. And I said earlier that as a ministry, we recognize that we have to do some work in updating these pieces of legislation. For example, the Trade Union Act includes some provisions for $5 penalties. So a lot of our labor legislation needs to be updated, and that's something that we are working on as we speak. While there are those pieces of legislation, and while those pieces of legislation have their own ways of enforcement and have their own consequences when there are breaches, we are of the view, and this is an area in which we agree with the international community, where best practice is concerned, that along with those remedies and sanctions that exist in those other pieces of legislation, we believe that an excellent incentive, particularly in a smaller and developing state like Barbados, with an economy like almost every other smaller and developing state that relies a lot on government injection into the economy, that the risk of either not being on a list of contractors to be able to benefit from government procurement or to lose concessions is a really good way to keep employers adhering to some basic level of treatment of their workers. And that is really, Mr. Chairman, the essence of both Labor Clauses Acts, the Public Contracts Act, as well as the Concessions Act. It is saying, let us establish a minimum standard by which we hold all employers to adhere to. And if there is breach, then employers will know that there is a possibility of losing something that is of significance to the employing entity. And that is really the essence. So that we are saying that workers have rights with holiday with pay, maternity leave, employment of women, the maternity leave legislation, prevention of discrimination. There are a suite of pieces of labor legislation. Those rights and the processes enshrined in those pieces of legislation remain. But know that government, from government's perspective, will be working in parallel with you. So while you pursue your remedies and your justice under those pieces of legislation, government using money that has been either not paid in by those who receive concessions, or that could be received by those in the realm of public procurement, will know that their money, workers' money, Barbadians' money, will not be used to support employing organizations that go below a standard that has been established by consultation. And that is the essence of the legislation and the reason we saw the need for the legislation.
Thank you. My second and final question relates to self-employed persons. There's a belief, maybe misconstrued, that to register as a self-employed person in terms of paying national insurance, that this exercise is onerous. A lot of persons in my constituency, they have expressed difficulty. I know that your ministry up to recently, probably in the month of December, when persons were celebrating the Yuletide season, would have made some changes so that this exercise of registering as a self-employed person is one that is basically perfunctory. I want you to, probably your director at NAS, to be able to take us through in a very simplistic way from the registration to the first payment for persons who are self-employed. Because I think COVID was a real litmus test for us when we sit down and recognize that a lot of persons who we thought were in the net, the artisans, the artists, those persons who sell vegetables, we recognize that there is a whole group of people who were not paying INS and were treating themselves as self-employed persons. And so I just want you to take us through, whether it's online or if it's registration in person, the whole entire process from registration to first payment. If you could do that, my constituents would be happy, and I know some other persons outside the epicenter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member, and we would want to assist constituents all over Christchurch and in other parts of Barbados, and I ask in that vein that the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the National Insurance and Social Security Service provide that information for us.
Good afternoon, Francis Walcott, Deputy Chief Executive Officer, National Insurance and Social Security Service. Francis Walcott, Deputy Chief Executive Officer, National Insurance and Social Security Service. The process to register as a self-employed person, unfortunately, is still paper-based, and persons have to present themselves to the office to register. The process is the same as it is as obtains to register for a national insurance number. There's a form to be completed which requests your name, date of birth, address. And you are required to bring either original or certified copies of your birth certificate and your national ID. If you do not have a birth certificate and you have a valid passport, that can also be used, or a driver's license. Once you issue a national insurance number, it's a national insurance number for life. So if a person is an employee and switches to become a self-employed person, that is the same number that they would keep. There's just another section that they have to indicate on the form that they have become self-employed and from what date self-employment commenced. Numbers are issued at the same time, within about 10 minutes or so. And the first payment depends, as we've moved now to online payments, and we've also moved to payments without having to complete forms, where a self-employed person can come in at any time, or online, or via bank transfer. They can pay any time of the day from at home. Just make their payment, and they will be issued with a receipt online. If they make an online payment, they'll be issued with a receipt via email. If in person, they'll be issued a physical receipt.
I would just want to...
Honourable Member, before you do that, you'd asked about the fact that there are persons out there who are not registered. So you heard of the process, the current process. What I'd add to that is that we are in the process, and the board, not sure if they started to discuss it yet, but I've spoken to the chair and the director and the CEO. The matter of having persons, dedicated persons in the field going out to these persons. So beside the public education exercises, people need to touch people. And it is our intention to have persons in the field going to speak, to encourage, and to assist with their registration as self-employed persons for the purpose of national insurance. So there is in train, and I believe early in the new financial year, that will be actually put into effect, where we have those persons who go out into communities, into centers of small business, into places where there are self-employed persons, to educate in a more direct way and to assist them with the process that has just been outlined by the Deputy Chief Executive Officer.
Well, I'm happy to hear that both the registration and payments in the near, not too distant future could be done online. But I just want to ask one additional question to end off, and that is, our payments, are they done quarterly, or you can do one lump sum at the end of a particular year? I just want to know the system of payment.
The new self-employed regime, payments can be actually made daily. They can be made weekly, they can be made monthly, they can be made quarterly, they can be made annually. Depends on the income flow of the self-employed person.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to also begin on the NAS in relation to some things that I know affected people. I would have raised before, I think, and I'm seeking an answer again in this same matter. I had a constituent who had paid in 498 contributions. He is now deceased. I had written the NAS, this is about 2 or 3 years ago, about 3 years ago. I had written the NAS at the time because it was told that he needed to pay in, that he needed 2 more contributions in order to be entitled to receive a pension of some sort. I was told at the time that I could not make the 2 additional payments so as to bring him up to a point where he would be entitled to something, because he would then not be receiving either contributory pension or non-contributory pension. And at 498 contributions, it seemed to me almost an injustice. I wrote a letter. It's documented, it's somewhere in the file. So I'm just seeking clarification on if that is still the policy in relation to how persons are treated, what number of contributions, and would a person be allowed to make an additional set of payments, maybe lump sum payments, to be able to bring themselves into a position where they're right with the NAS. A part B to that same question, so still question 1, but part B. There are also persons who've expressed to me on several occasions that they have had employers who have deducted what they thought was NAS contributions on their behalf. And when it came time either to retire and get their benefits, or if they were sick, they would then come to find out that there were no payments paid in, or very few paid in on their behalf, which again is also an injustice. So my question is in relation to how does the NAS treat to these scenarios, and how, for the sake of people, what systems are now in place to rectify both of these wrongs? The one in relation to persons who are almost, in terms of contributions, almost there, and those for whom deductions were made in their name but never paid in. That's question 1.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'll ask the Deputy Chief Executive Officer to weigh in with respect to the answer to your question.
Issue of persons who are almost qualified for a contributory pension, and I'm assuming that's what you were asking about, a contributory pension.
Sorry, Honourable Member. I don't know if it is the microphone or something, but you're difficult to understand.
Persons who are almost qualified for a contributory pension but who fall short would be eligible for a contributory grant, which is a one-off payment. Depending on their circumstances, they may be eligible also for a non-contributory pension, depending on whether or not they were self-employed during their history of employment. Assessment is carried out to determine whether or not this person was self-employed. And if it is determined that by evidence that they were self-employed and did not contribute, then that can lead to a denial of the request for non-contributory pension. You said your constituent had 498 contributions. 500 contributions are required still currently to qualify.
Perhaps Mr. Chairman, maybe it would be better if you go directly to the mic or use a different mic or something.
500 contributions are still currently required to qualify for a contributory pension. So a person who falls short, as I said, would get a contributory grant, which is a one-off payment. There's an option for persons who are approaching pensionable age and realize that they're short. They can write to the board and request to pay voluntary contributions for a period of 2 years, which will allow them to qualify for a pension. But you have to do that before you reach pensionable age, not after.
So if I may add to that, Honourable Member, through you, Chair, a couple of things. One is that the officers of the National Insurance and Social Security Service cannot, of their own volition, violate the regulations that govern the National Insurance Scheme. That is why, as a government, we have determined, and we've discussed this at Cabinet, we've determined that there are quite a number of regulations to the National Insurance legislation that need to be changed, need to be amended. We've spoken at the level of government of prorating, for example. We have, and I did this on the floor of this Honourable Chamber, spoken to paying late with a penalty so that there is a deduction. You still get the pension, but it is not as much because you did not allow the scheme to be able to invest those funds when they could have been able to get some measure of return on those funds. Now, I understand the Honourable Member's situation as somebody who represents people as well in St. Peter. I've had some of those as well. And it feels very badly that a person is so close, but yet so far. To insist that the officers do something that is not provided for in their legislation is to put them, well, to create a moral hazard, really, for them. And that is not something that this minister or this government does. We don't talk about transparency and integrity because it is buzzword or anything like that. We follow the rules. However, we do not allow ourselves to be slave to the rules. And so we are actually in the process. I've seen first drafts already of some amendments to the regulations. This is one, but there are a whole raft of regulations. Some go back to the 60s and 70s that really need to be updated. And the legal department, the legal section at the National Insurance and Social Security Service is actively working on changing some of these. But the other thing, the Deputy Chief spoke to finding out information and making adjustments before pensionable age. This falls into the area of public education. And that is why I continue to say that one of the challenges we have, I don't know if we should call it a challenge, one of our deficiencies, because I tend to be very straight with this chamber and with the public, one of our deficiencies is how we educate the public. We've recognized that we have not done as good a job as we could. The National Insurance and Social Security Service does a great job, but there are still some gaps. We are working to address those. in recent publications of the one, this Sunday paper, I think there's only one now, you would have seen, or members of the public would have seen, some improvement in terms of our outreach to our public. And that is part of the thrust of this new National Insurance and Social Security Service. We have to make sure that people know. That's one. The other thing is that we are encouraging, and I use this opportunity to reinforce it, persons who are employed. We encourage you to go on the portal or to have a relative or confidant of yours do it on your behalf. Go on the portal so that the fact that an employer has not paid in your contributions after deducting them does not shock you at the point of pensionable age. So we are going to do our best from the inspections perspective. We also want workers to participate in that, let me call it policing exercise, by staying on top of the contributions, see what is happening in your account, so that you can raise the flag early and we can have redress as is appropriate.
So still on the question one, because it had two parts. The second part was in relation to the NAS deductions, which we know happens. People claim they're deducting on behalf of people, and they don't pay them in. What is the role of the NAS in seeking justice for these people? But my first question still leaves me a little bit, I'm still a little unclear. Okay, so when the lump sum is paid, what is the nature of this lump sum? If my constituent had in 498 contributions, I'm not making this up. He was told he needed to have in 500 contributions. He was 2 contributions short. I wrote a letter on his behalf. I understand processes, you see, but I feel that we have to be, as we build out, because we are the government, we have to build systems that represent people that are fair. So I'm trying to figure out what is the nature of the lump sum that you spoke of, and if we are going to be making any moves to correct what obviously must be seen as some kind of a deficiency. Because surely a person, especially the generation that would have been turning 70, 65 in the last 8 years, many of these persons aren't as au fait with a lot of these rules. Persons genuinely trusted the system. I mean, it wasn't a case of people being malicious or devious or seeking to violate rules. These persons genuinely trusted the system. Many of them not aware of this. So I found the 2 payment, I must tell you, Minister, the 2 payment shortage and the consequences to me seemed a bit severe. So I mean, we could discuss this offline, but my question is in relation to what is the nature of this lump sum that the person would get? How is this calculated? Is it a fixed amount? Is it a percentage? Is it prorated? How do you calculate this? And then my question, the second part was in relation to the employers who deduct and do not pay. What is the role of the NAS?
I'll ask the Deputy Chief, the Chief Executive Officer will respond to that.
Okay. Good afternoon, Minister. Minister, I want to first assure you that your concerns are our concerns. That was one constituent that you had, but we see it for all the constituents. And it certainly pains us dearly where we see persons 2, 5, and so forth. But as you know, wherever there's a cutoff, there are going to be people affected. I can assure you that the grant that is given, there's a grant, and the grant is a function of what you've paid in. So just as your pension is a function of your contribution, the grant is a function of your contributions as well. And in some cases, the grant is substantial, very substantial. So it isn't like 500, it isn't fixed, but it is a function of what you paid in. So that gentleman at 498 would, well, it is not a continuous payment as in a pension, it would be a substantial amount, And for the persons who've passed through my hands, who've had that substantial amount, I have cautioned them to get financial guidance on how to manage that, because it comes in a lump sum, there's no more, and you have to then manage it over a period of time. Persons prefer to have a pension, but they can also treat that lump sum in a way that it forms a pension for them. But it's not a small amount, like $500 or anything, it's substantial. And at $498, and he's short by 2, it would be substantial relative to his earnings and the contributions he have made. In the second point, with regard to persons whose employers have deducted, the national insurance has not paid it in for us, paid it in. It has always been and continues to be the policy of the national insurance not to disadvantage the worker. So once we have evidence of the contribution schedule, we will honor those payments. Where you have a difficulty is where we have never received the schedule and therefore have no record of you. As the minister would have said, we have an information portal where anybody can go and log on and they can see their entire employment history, all the monies that have paid in from all of the employers and so forth. Further to say, as the minister have said, because he's fully in favor of what we're doing, we intend to do an educational program to alert persons that they too must also check up on what is being paid in for them, because we don't want a situation where you reach 67 and have never checked and don't recognize that there's nothing there for you.
Mr. Chair, just allow me to repeat what I said earlier with respect to the fact that we are addressing the issue by amending the regulations. That is the route. Unless there is a discretion built into the regulation, then I will not ask my officers to go against the regulations. But I do understand that it is people who we're trying to help. Right? These are not statistics or objects, these are real people. And so we have to change the regulations to make sure that the people of this country are not disadvantaged. We are on our way in that regard.
Thank you very much, Minister. I look forward to this PR program. I do know, I actually just received another letter. I've received several, but I do know that there are persons in whose name deductions were made to NIS. This cannot be a one-off. And this is the first time I'm hearing of the idea that NIS covers it. I mean, I was totally unaware, and I'm sure there are many people who don't know this. And if there are a list of conditions that have to be met for this to be possible, I would hope that these conditions are enforced gently, because many people do not think that they are entitled to anything. In fact, many people are currently in the process of engaging with Labor Department and NIS on these matters. So I look forward to the PR program and hope that will make a difference in the lives of ordinary people. Question number 2. My second question is in relation to the actual estimates of expenditure under sub-program 0486, Ecclesiastical Affairs. I once was a minister of Ecclesiastical Affairs for 5 minutes. And so, until it was taken and given to the Honourable Member for St. Peter. But I see here a sum of $891,816 in the estimates under operating expenses for Ecclesiastical Affairs. And I'm just wondering what that could possibly be. What would those services be before? And then my part B to that question is, one of the things done under Ecclesiastical Affairs is the ecumenical service, the multi-faith service. And there were some persons who would express concern, Honourable Minister, in relation to us bringing together different faiths and so on to have a service in a Christian society. Some were concerned. I just wonder what your thoughts are in relation to that particular matter, in relation to persons' concerns, some persons' concerns about us bringing together all these different faiths. But the first is in relation to what exactly is this $890,000 for?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Mr. Chair, the vote for what is now called Ecclesiastical Affairs includes funds for the symposium, an annual symposium that we have had, now the second iteration of it. It includes funds for the service, to which I'll speak in a moment. It also includes funds to the Anglican Church and the Methodist Church related to the use of the continued use of their properties. This is a historical, it has a historical legacy, but there is continuing use of, particularly in the school system, of properties that are the property of the Anglican Church, or were the property, and the state over many decades allocates a sum of money to go to the Anglican Church and the Methodist Church in that regard. That is really the total of the funds included. No, I forgot, there's also a wellness, faith-based organization wellness program. We've started to speak to leaders of faith-based organizations. We did that either at the end of January or very early in February. I don't remember the exact date. We introduced to them the framework of the policy, and we'll be developing that. This will include maybe providing some resource materials, having workshops. So there are some funds allocated in these estimates because we believe that faith-based organizations are, while part of the third sector, they have their unique and effective role still in our society. With respect to the celebration at independence, it is very clear to me that we live in a country with multiple faiths. It is clear that Christianity is still the dominant faith, but that there are other faiths. And Mr. Chairman, if I am going to preside over a celebration, a service, however styled, that purports to celebrate the independence of this nation, then all people of faith must be able to participate. That is absolutely my perspective. And I say that as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. I'm of the view that if you are having a faith celebration, then it must not exclude persons of any faith. It already excludes persons with no faith, but it is a faith celebration. And so it must embrace all faiths. I also believe that no person of faith should be compelled to engage in such a celebration if it violates their conscience. And in this country, there is freedom of religion, freedom to associate, freedom to have no religion. And so we do not compel, we encourage, we do not compel persons to attend if they feel it will violate their own personal mores, values, their perspectives on the exercise of their faith. But we are of the view, and this minister and our government is certainly of the view, that if it is going to be a celebration of persons of faith, then it must include persons of all the faiths that are represented in the country. I understand the discomfort, and that is one of the reasons why I identified the perspective, the faith perspective from which I come, because there are persons who are in my section of the Christian faith who have challenges with it as well. So I am very aware. I hear it sometimes in my own local church. We cannot exclude persons of faith in a celebration that is intended to be a faith-based celebration.
Sir, thank you very much, Honourable Minister. My final question is in relation really to NAS, but just generally on the state of the NAS. And I ask this question, sir, because I want to know the state when we came in 2018 and what is the current state. And I ask this question because of some questions raised by the opposition leader and some clarification given by the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance. This question has some numbers in it, so it may cause the opposition leader some discomfort. But we came into office, the debt at the time was about $18 billion. The work of the ministry, and it is good to remember that even though we had some consultants and some assistance in sorting out this situation, the vast majority of this work was done in-house. We brought the debt down at that time to about $12 billion, so roughly $6 billion in savings. If you convert that to US, that's about $3 billion. The opposition leader is concerned that some money was spent, around 27 million, but if you spend 27 million and bring your debt down by 6 billion, unless you are a proponent of Calmanomics, then it is clear to me that you got more than bang for your buck. Additionally, the point was made that some funds were written off from the NAS, most of it interest, and to give the impression, therefore, that the NAS is unstable as a consequence. So I would like to know from you, sir, what is the current state of the NAS? Is it in a healthy form? Is it unhealthy? And what was the state of the NAS when we came into office?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Mr. Chair, we came to office with the scenario which I previously outlined. I don't think I'm going to go back over that. We engaged in the process of debt restructuring, and we spoke to that earlier. We also received the 17th actuarial review in 2021, I think. 2022, the 17th actuarial review, which indicated to us that while the national insurance funds, the debt restructuring notwithstanding, was in decent shape at the time of the actuarial review, we had a date with the destiny somewhere around the year 2034. As a government, we did not take the view that we may not be the government in 2034 and we could leave it for those who would be around at the time. We believe that having come into contact with that information, that we ought to do something about it. So the national insurance scheme was not in crisis, but would go into crisis sometime in the future. We set about the process of engaging Barbadians generally. Before we engaged with the town hall meetings, we spoke to almost every interest group. We spoke to the Democratic Labour Party. We spoke to I don't remember the name of the other party, but there was another party that contested from opposition leader. But we spoke to that party as well. We spoke to all of the trade union groups in this country. We spoke to BARP, and we spoke to the workers of the National Insurance Department as it then was. The Honourable Member is correct that a lot of the work that came out of those engagements was done in-house. After those engagements, as a matter of fact, I think it is necessary for me to say to this Honourable Chamber and to the country that this government took those stakeholder groups into its confidence. And even before the review was laid in Parliament, the stakeholder groups already knew what was in the report and had already started to give their suggestions. And we got suggestions from across the board, from what we refer to then as the two opposition political parties, from the trade unions, right across the civil society organizations. We took the suggestions from them. We embarked on a series of engagements with the public, and we had the National Insurance Department organize its own. The Democratic Labour Party also organized one, and we willingly participated, because this matter, as far as we were and are concerned, sits above politics, particularly party politics. This is a national issue. And so we engaged across the board, and we composed a group called the core group, and that core group examined all of the suggestions, and I think I can say that the core group's composition reflected participation from political organizations that did not constitute the government at the time when the core group was put together. It reflected a broad base and a broad approach. The recommendations coming out of that core group went to the board, the National Insurance Board. The National Insurance Board made suggestions based on that report, but not exclusively. Based on that report, made suggestions to the Cabinet. The Cabinet accepted the proposals from the National Insurance Board, and those recommendations were laid in this honourable chamber by me some while ago. So, Mr. Chairman, those measures represent the approach of that broad-based core group. There was also an advisory group, which is even broader based. The recommendations that have now been put into place represent the output of that broad consultative process, and those recommendations, those actions, we are confident will mitigate against us ending up in trouble in 2034. We have not had an actuarial review since the 17th, so I will not purport to suggest that I've done any full or complete study. I'm not going in that direction at all. But I'm saying that based on the actuarial review, based on the report put on top of the suggestions, and remembering that that core group also included the actuary, government and this minister is confident, we all are confident, that those measures will avert any calamity in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Minister. Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael South. Now go to Honourable Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just one question and some support to offer for your programs. One of the things that the ministry has been seeking to do is to connect people with opportunities, put opportunity and labor together. And I understand that there was a program for the online platform for employment, matching employers with labor, as well as a job registry. I know you had done some work with the hospitality industry, and there was an intention to expand that to other sectors. I'm very interested now, as there are a number of people in St. Philip West looking for jobs, and it isn't always easy for people to know where to go and how to find. And if there is that central place that makes it easier to connect the labor to employment, I'm just very interested as to where is the ministry with those programs at this time, and how do you plan to be able to expand them in the year coming?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Mr. Chair, we've examined two possibilities and are in the process, is already come, actually, the comments on those two examinations have come to me, and I've proffered my own perspective on the direction we should take. But the director of the Barbados Employment and Career Counseling Service will tell you that I have instructed that in short order, and short order does not mean December of 2024, it means sometime around the middle of 2024, that we must have that system in place. There's one that we've looked at which does both that kind of matching, but also would allow us to work with your ministry with respect to the counseling side of it, so that persons who are at school, for example, wanting to go into a particular career direction would be able to go on this portal and identify the subjects that they'll need to do, probably the institutions, the educational institutions that they could apply to and enroll in order to pursue that goal of theirs. So we want to make it into almost a full service, because we are also recognizing that this matter of career counseling, we are pretty sure that enough career counselors to address the situation in the country, notwithstanding the fact that our population is declining, we're not going to have enough career counselors in the foreseeable future. And so we have to use the technology to assist us in that counseling work. Our counselors already work with your guidance counselors, but we know that your guidance counselors' hands are full. So you just got to drive past the school in the morning, before school or right after. You know the guidance counselors' hands must be full. Our position is that we need to employ the technology to assist both. And our intention is that the ministry responsible for education will also be able to use that to help them to be able to help the counselors and maybe teachers as well to be able to guide our students. But with specific respect to matching work with, well, workers with opportunities, this system, which must happen during this calendar year, will allow for persons to be able to go to see what is available. Matter of fact, to also to put their CVs online, so that there may be a reversal. It may be that a prospective employer is searching for somebody but doesn't want to put an ad, doesn't want 50 applications to wade through, and may want to, on their own, search through CVs. We are working on that, and we continue to discuss it, and I think we are along. I can't tell you that we are far along, but the intention is that sometime during this calendar year, we will have that facility in place.
Thank you. And my second comment, support, and a little bit of a question even, is on your literacy and numeracy program. I think that it is an excellent initiative. We are seeing certainly in the schools that there is additional need for there to be literacy and numeracy, and in fact, in the primary school level, we are adding teachers who are specialists in those areas exclusively. But you're working with the adult literacy side, and I just want you to know you're actually preempting me by a week to the day, because next week, Wednesday, we'll be launching the National Task Force on Literacy, headed by Dr. Sylvia Henry of the University of the West Indies. And that mandate extends not only to literacy in the schools, but also adult literacy. And so we are looking forward to the collaboration that we'll be able to have with your ministry. And I'm just very interested as to where are you with the development of those programs, and just letting you know you also have a national task force into which you can link now, so that we have a whole of country approach and all stages from school to post-school.
Thank you very much for that, Honourable Member. Mr. Chairman, I heard in that statement and maybe question, I am sure that I heard a distinct invitation to our ministry to be part of the framework, not as an add-on, but to be part of the task force itself. And sufficient that that is what I heard, I accept even without consulting my permanent secretary, because I'm sure that he also will accept. He is a man of literature. He did better than I at school in that regard. And so I know that he would accept anything related to literacy. So I'm happy that we will be a part of that task force, but I want to allow the program director to speak to what it is we are doing so that you can hear a little bit about it.
Okay, thank you. The literacy initiative that we have in the ministry is twofold. On one end, we're looking to pilot some literacy training, particularly for our job starters. We recognize that a number of them have left school and may have some challenges there. So to address that, we're looking to develop a program that will strengthen what we will be focusing on functional literacy to be able to work and include not just numeracy and reading skills, but also even digital literacy as part of that. So we're looking to develop that training initiative and use it as a pilot to learn from it and to see how we can replicate it and use it as a model to roll out at a national level across different programs and also use it across the third sector. The other component of the initiative is more on like strategic planning. We were looking to develop a national literacy strategy. So hearing about this task force now, we have to know, we welcome this opportunity to work with the ministry because we did have a small working group that did include the Ministry of Education and some other key stakeholders. But within this task force, it definitely gives a stronger framework that we could build this national adult literacy strategy so that anyone who is outside the formal education years and they need assistance in these areas, that we can help them. We recognize that they've had a number of different initiatives across other ministries, like we know People Empowerment, for example, would have had programs, learning from them and coming together and see how we could build the capacity, because from early discussions, we recognize that there's going to be issues in terms of adult educators and building up that capacity. How we can strategically align with the third sector, especially community-based organizations, because Barbadians are proud people, and in terms of getting that help, if you have groups that are within the community, plugged into the community and have those relationships already, they can leverage that to help those persons who need to develop these basic skills. So we want to build that capacity in the third sector. So that's what the national strategy will be about. How can we provide literacy support at all levels, and then even in the education and training institutions, from what can be done there, is there room for bridging programs and so on. So the task force, the Ministry of Labor and Education, I believe, have the same objective. So now we could come together and just make sure that we work towards that together within this national strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Philip West. Honourable Minister, you can now wrap up.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think we've had a full discussion on the component parts of the work of the ministry that I have the honor to lead, and the ministry that is staffed by the competent persons who are sitting around and behind me. We have done significant work. We recognize that. We realize that we are not where we ought to be, and we have set ourselves certain goals as to how we will achieve in the various areas, whether it is in the labor component of our ministry's work, whether it is in the social security component of the ministry's work, whether it is in the social dialogue component of the ministry's work, or whether it is in the third sector, civil society component of our ministry's work. We recognize that, and probably like the ministry that preceded us in the well, while often there is significant discussion on what are called the economic sectors, there is a growing understanding. It is one that should have been there before, but there's a growing understanding, like an early political philosopher indicated. The political infrastructure, superstructure, is based on a social infrastructure. And so this ministry recommits to this Honourable Chamber and to the country that we will do all that we can, as quickly as we can, to make sure that Barbados is that place where people can consider it the best place to work, the best place to volunteer and to give back, the best place to retire. We are very focused on the fact that our mandate is about helping people. And so, like I said in the response to the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, where we have hindrances to that, we will not allow the legislation to hamstring us. We will work with it while it is in place, while we work assiduously to make sure that it is amended in such a way as to allow ordinary people to benefit from the work of this government. I am hopeful that the sober and calm approach of the ministry, as exemplified by all the officers who spoke and myself as their minister, will allow the country to know that we are not either hot and sweaty or overly aggressive, but that all we do in this ministry is thought through, that there is consultation, and having done those things, we then are in a position to make good policy. We also want to assure the country, through this Honourable Chamber, that while we seek to do right by the people of this country, if ever we make a misstep, we will be women and men enough to own up to a misstep and to make any necessary corrections. And so, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, with those few concluding words, I beg to move that Head 84 stand parked.
The question is that Head 84 stand part. All honourable members in favor, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it. I want to, at this time, thank our public officers for so coming to this chamber and sharing with not just us, the honorable members, but more importantly, the people of Barbados under in this particular aspect as we discuss Head 84 today. We have other business to discuss, and therefore we are going to give you the opportunity to depart the chamber at this time, and then we will finally move into the other business we have to discuss. But thank you very much once again for your contribution that you've made not only today, but that you continue to make to this country through your efforts.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker. Beg for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. You think the ayes have it.
Chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again.
Recommittal of government notices, sir. Notice.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to give notice of the Corporation Top-Up Tax Bill 2024, as well as the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2024.
First readings of bills.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Corporation Top-Up Tax Bill 2024 and the first reading of the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2024.
The questions that the aforementioned bills be read here first time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Revert to government business.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we've come to the end of today's sitting. I therefore beg to move the suspension of the House until Friday, the 1st of March at 9 a.m. 9 a.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until the 1st of March 2024 at 9 a.m. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This Honourable Chamber stands suspended until Friday, the 1st day of March, 2024 at 9 a.m.